Back to the podium.
My name is Jim McInnes. Just a couple of quick things that I've heard from the councillors. Marion Wilkinson talked about how because of amalgamation there's obviously increasing costs. Mentioned a curious situation where 4 people servicing roads, and when you get amalgamation you have to employ one manager. I would suggest that the 4 people from various municipalities would only need one manager, not one for 4. Mr. Cullen talks about providing services. Well, there was no services for the bus services in the winter of 2007-2008, and there was certainly no sewer services to the people out in Glencairn. However, the main thrust of zero means zero. Obviously, there's going to be inflation costs. The only way to attack zero means zero is what we're hearing from the advocacy group and indeed from Mr. Cullen. We have 78% of the costs are labour. We have outrageous increases in compensation to city workers. The only way to attack the efficiencies is outsourced to the private sector. We need to have I would ask Mr. Cullen, if you go forward as mayor, will you pursue an aggressive policy of outsourcing services to the private sector so that we can have competition and reduce costs?
Yeah, right.
Thank you.
So folks, how did you like that bus drive? Didn't like it, did you? Can you imagine privatizing the bus system, outsourcing?
Yeah.
Many cities have private
Folks, what would happen is the law says no matter who the employer is, he must recognize that union. So whether it's Greyhound, Colonial, somebody else, that union has rights to represent its membership, and that contract would travel over. So who's going to decertify the police union? Who's going to decertify the fire union? Who is going to, someone says here, someone made the statement, and it cannot go wrong.
Excuse me. We're going to have that. Come on, I don't want to, you're going to leave on your own? Okay, thank you.
So we have a situation where our wage rates, despite what you hear from my colleagues who take a local compensation figure divided by the employees and say that's the average salary, when any sensible person knows that the city is responsible for contributing to pension, contributing to workman's compensation, contributing an OHIP payment, and that is factored into compensation, but that does not end up on the paycheck. So when people say we have outrageous wage increases, I'm sorry not. You check our audited figures, you check the Auditor General, you go into the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and, website and look at those compensation figures across Ontario, and you'll find that the City of Ottawa is comparable. And the proof in the pudding, this AAA rating doesn't come around because we overspend, because we're wrong. I'm sorry, you can argue.
Have them coming in right now in Glencairn.
But the facts are there. The facts are there, and the misinformation that is being put out by, unfortunately, misguided people doesn't help public debate. Doesn't help when you come make these choices. And so when people say, just outsource. Did I ask you if you like that bus strike? Because that's a recipe for disaster. You don't see that happening in Toronto. You don't see that happening in Hamilton.
They had a garbage strike. You got a short memory?
That's what you really want in this town. Don't you think that when someone goes around and picks up your garbage, they should get a living wage? Don't you think when that policeman comes to 2 o'clock in the morning, they should get a living wage?
What's a living wage?
Excuse me. Thank you.
They don't even make as much as city employees.
I know there's a lot of passion, and I really encourage it, but we want to, we've got these people here, and again, we want to be able to do this again. If this just turns into a yelling and screaming, much like a question period, it doesn't accomplish much. Okay? You may not like what you hear, but that's what we came here, is to hear what was to be said. Do you gentlemen have something to respond to that?
Mr. Cullen just described very descriptively legal extortion. The unions have us by with a rope around our neck. Councillors, and not only Cullen, but the majority of the others sit around and think that they can't do anything about it. I have two pet peeves on that, maybe to save money. 52% of the total budget right now is comprised of employee expense. And the councillors say that they have no control over that. So I would like to see them reduce their salary tomorrow by 48%.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm not finished yet. The part of farming out work and whatnot could work if you didn't have what Mr. Cullen said about the law in Ontario about unions carrying on to another organization that takes over the power. There's one thing that we have to do in Ottawa. If they can't control the wages or the levels that, again, Cullen described, we have to reduce the number of employees, and we figure from some of the calculation that we have, it should be very easy for them to reduce the number by 10%, and that will get us into a zero means zero.
Thank you. To the podium.
My name is Jim McKenzie. I'm with the Carleton Landowners Association. I was intrigued by Councillor Wilkinson's comments on amalgamation. And I'm embarrassed to be in front of all these fine people because in the rural area, we're now costing you money. In spite of the fact that our taxes have gone up 50% more than the rate of inflation in the last 6 years. We're a ward of the city because we're not covering, in terms of the taxes collected, all of our costs. So that doesn't make us feel very good.
And the farmers feed our cities.
This isn't all about salaries. It's about a lot of little things, and they all add up.
Let's get a question.
Okay. Patty lives in Dunrobin. We now have sidewalks in Dunrobin, but we don't have any pedestrians.
That's like the bus stop in front of my parents' house out in Bearbrook. They're
Award of the
the only
city.
people that are like,
Is the city willing to work with us and put together a proposal for separating the rural part of the city from the urban part, so we can do the good representation?
Thank you.
Frankly, I would like to go back like we had it before, but anyway.
so would we.
The difficulty of doing that is we cannot do it ourselves. It's legislation by the province required. And when this new city was first formed, there was part of West Carleton was given the right to have a referendum to decide if they wanted to go with the adjacent municipality and not stay with Ottawa. And they decided to stay with Ottawa. So we have that difficulty now. I think there has to be, I'm not opposed to looking at changing boundaries around. It can happen, it happened, we did it with Canada. Sometimes we work out and some it won't. But I know I just want to say it's not an easy thing to do, and it would require provincial legislation, and they won't do that unless there's some clear-cut things of doing it. And what's happened over the time now is we've got a lot of the rural areas are now depending on our city services. Carp is connected to the sanitary sewer system in Canada. The villages of Osgood, and there's a lot of service going into the rural areas, so we have to work out how to handle that. Not impossible, but I certainly am willing to talk about it, but I'm always willing to talk about things that make things better. But it's something that would be tricky. And probably not all of the rural areas would go. For example, the areas that are very close to the urban would probably stay because they could become urban in the future. But the ones out, the people out in the old Bolton Township, or Fitzroy Township, particularly Fitzroy is very isolated. There's a possibility there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. O'Day.
Quite frankly, you raise a very interesting point. We have not gotten the benefits of amalgamation. And the people, some of the people responsible for that are sitting in the room right now. Really, we need a change.
Yeah.